Hey online family,
Hey.
welcome. We're in a series called Acting Up.
And hey, our hope in this series is to kind of journey through the book of Acts and to look at it, not to play copycat, but to really look at it as a foundation that we can leap off of and see what it looks like for God to move in our everyday lives.
We hope you get a lot out of it. God bless you.
See ya.
We're going to go through some things today in a series called Acting Up. We've been walking through the book of Acts for the last 10 years or so. No, I don't know. It's been the longest series I think we've done in a long time anyway. But it's been good. And again, as we go through this thing, one of the things that, I just really want to stand out is people we're reading about, we're talking about are people just like you and me. Okay? We don't want to idolize it. I want to respect and reverence what God's done through them, but I'm telling you what, God wants to do things through you, just like he did through Peter, he did through Paul. You've got the same Holy Ghost living in you. And I'm telling you, we're living in a different day, but it's even more so he wants to show himself to this world. You're an influence. You have people that watch your life. It's crazy, especially in a town like Menominee. We're smaller. People see what you're doing. And they take note that you're walking with Jesus. So I've got basically three things I want to convey this morning. I've got a bunch of scriptures to go through. I'm not going to read. I'm going to go from like chapter 21 to 26, and I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. We'd be here all day while I'm reading, if that was the case. And I'm not. Do you like people reading to you? I kind of doze off when people, unless it's Dana reading to me, it's hard for me to do that. But anyway, we're going to go through these chapters, and there's basically three things that stood out to me this week. One of them is the contentment that the Apostle Paul was able to find in every circumstance that he found himself in. So we're going to look for that. Another one was this that stood out to me is there's power in your story. There's power in your testimony is another word we could use. And every one of you in here have a story, okay? And sometimes the devil will come. He's such a mean dude, but he'll try to beat us over the head and try to make us think that our story isn't that big a deal. But I'm telling you today that your story matters. And it has influence. And the other thing I want to talk about briefly is Paul's thorn in the flesh. Does that excite everybody in here? I tell you, buckle your seat belts right now. Don't go, well, you can jump if you want. But anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about Paul's thorn in the flesh because sometimes there's confusion, I find, and it's good if we can shine some light and expose some of that and think clearly on a topic. And I guess as I've been reading through the book of Acts, I kind of bounce over then in the epistles to some of the letters that Paul wrote, and I see how he said some of the things he said. Because I'm reading his life story here in Acts, and it's like, oh, I get it. I know why you'd say, that I found in every state I'm in to be content or to find peace wherever I'm at. Because there was some very unpeaceful situations that he was in, and he had to learn to draw on God in every place that he went. You know what I'm talking about? So I kind of went through these chapters, and I've got a little synopsis of each one. I'll give it to you, and then we'll talk about the things that stood out to me. But in Acts 21, if you remember last week we were talking, we got up to this point where Paul said this, that it was like in his heart. He determined in his heart that he was going to go to Jerusalem. And God would confirm it in his heart, but not always through the people around him. People around him were like holding on to him and trying to keep him from doing the will of God. Don't ever hold people back from doing what God's called them to do. Be someone who encourages people to follow God. Let them be free. Let them be free. I remember when we started the church back in 2000, and we had a core of people that were with us from before we opened the doors. And about a year and a half in, one of the couples in our group, had a call on their life, and they were going to go start a church in Door County, Ed and Julie House. And we were for them. We knew all along that God's hand was on their life to go pastor somewhere. And we were just grateful for the time that we had with them. And I remember as we were preparing, when we sent them out, there's like a Bible study out there that had found them, and they're going to go out and start the church from that. We invited that group to come to, back then we called ourselves Liberty. They came there, and we actually roasted them right in the service. Remember Kerwin? We had him get up, and he roasted Ed and Julie. It was so good. We had such fun together. And I know the Lord said to Dana and I, as we were going through that whole time, is there's many people that are going to go out from the church. Many people, and there have been over the years. And what the Lord told us is, be people that let him go. Let them go and find the will of God. Let them go and be who they're called to be. And don't just hang on to them and say, now don't you all leave tomorrow, okay? Don't push me. But in life, you've got to let people fly. And so any case, what am I talking about? Paul had it in his heart. He was going to Jerusalem. So in chapter 21, he arrives in Jerusalem. Kind of give you my synopsis of it. He arrives in Jerusalem. He gets arrested. A riot takes place, everyday stuff with the Apostle Paul. It goes on in 22. He addresses the authorities that have held him captive here, and he tells his story. And when he tells us, what story did he tell? He told about how he got born again. He told about how he was riding down the road, minding his own business, and out of the sky, right in the middle of noonday sun, a light shines brighter than the noonday sun and knocks him off his horse, and him and all the people around him see the light, and Jesus started talking to him. I mean, this is wild. But it was a deciding moment in his life where his life changed. His life changed. And so he shares this story, and you think, well, cool, man. He's sharing the gospel. He's sharing what God did for him. What happens? Well, another riot took place. As he shared the story, it was an uproar. People began to threaten his life, going to kill him and stuff like that. So I would say this. You're not responsible for people's reactions, okay? All we're called to do is what God's shown us to do. Paul couldn't control. He shared the gospel. He shared what happened to him. He shared his story with them, and it caused a riot. But you know what? You just keep pressing on. I know that I'm not going back over everything we've read, but do you see the theme though? Like he preaches, a riot takes place. He preaches, gets arrested, gets flogged, gets put in stocks. An earthquake happens. They let them all out, but he finds them back in another town, and they throw stones at him, and they drag him out. They beat him with rods, and he goes back and preaches again. I mean, have you seen the pattern in his life? Well, then in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, we'll come to the first thing that I said I wanted to talk about this morning, and that's Paul's thorn. Commonly referred to as Paul's thorn. In 2 Corinthians 12, verse 7, you'll find these scriptures. It says, "Unless I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you." I like that. My grace is, that's not a mamby-pamby statement. It isn't a buck up, Paul. No, it's there's power at your disposal, Paul. You need to see it, and you need to know how to tap into it right where you're at. I can be this way sometimes. Maybe you can be this way. I go to God because of my what I'm going through, and I want God to change the circumstances, I've done that before, and it seems like every time it happens, what happens is God changes me. He changes me. He enables me. He equips me. He shows me how to tap into what I've got on the inside of me and rise up. So Paul's in that same place, and Jesus says to him, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength, God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. And so Paul grabbed this, and he says, therefore, most gladly, I rather boast in my infirmities than that the power of Christ may rest on me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecution, in distress, for Christ's sake. For when I'm weak, then I am strong. See, when I'm strong in my own flesh, really I'm weak. But when I see my weakness in my flesh, that is an opportunity for the strength of God to rise up big in me. All right, reading through this, I want to just point out a couple things. The word infirmity, I don't know where your mind goes when he talks about reading in this verse. He says the word infirmity twice. But the word infirmity, if you look it up, even look it up in dictionary.com or something, it's going to tell you this, that a common meaning for the word infirmity is weakness, okay? It doesn't necessarily equate to sickness. And many times I've heard, good-hearted, good preachers refer to this and say that Paul had this sickness that he begged the Lord to take from him, but the Lord said, no, just take it, and this is your cross to bear, in this life. But I would tell you this, that never is it a cross for you to bear in this life something that Jesus bore on the cross and redeemed you from. Okay? So think straight on this stuff. So the word infirmity doesn't necessarily mean sickness. It, in fact, most often is translated in the Bible as the word weakness. And then this whole thing, this thorn in the flesh, that sounds so nasty. It sounds like, I'm walking through the garden and I got attacked by some plant or something, or, I'm walking through life and something has just come up, bombarded my skin or whatever. But the word thorn in the flesh, this is not the first time that term is used in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. It's a term that was used throughout the Old Testament. And I'll give you 3 examples. Numbers 33:55. I'm not going to go there. But just for reference, Joshua 23:13 and Judges 2 through 3. It uses this exact same terminology, thorn in the flesh, pricks in the eyes. Paul didn't say pricks in the eyes, but he said thorn in the flesh. But the same idea is spoken of in the Bible. Every time it's spoken of, it's never spoken of as sickness. It's always talked about people that made your road hard. Okay? It's always about people that got stirred up against you. So then I read the account of Paul's life given through the book of Acts, and this is what I found. The same thing I told you is that everywhere Paul went, there were people stirred up against him and trying to stifle his ministry, trying to speak bad about Paul. And when he went to the Lord about it, the Lord says, listen, Paul, we're not going to get rid of these people. They're going to be there, but I'm going to be strong in you. So, we never want to be those people. Can I say that? We never want to. I'm brought back to when I went to Bible school. I went to Rhema Bible School down in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Broken Arrow to be exact. And Kenneth E. Hagin was the president of the school when I went there, and he was also the head teacher. I had always had a class with Brother Hagin. Called him Brother Hagin. How's that, And I remember, the things that really stood out to me the most, even though he did some really good teaching, but the things that really struck my heart were different times when he'd come into class and he'd just share something from his heart that I knew was the Holy Spirit. And I knew it just going like a smart bomb, went right off in me. And one day he came into class just moseying in. If you ever saw Brother Hagin, you know what I mean. He just kind of moseyed around. And he comes in and he just looked at us. And I'm in the second row and he says, listen, guys, when you get out of here, when you graduate and you get out in the ministry, he says, be for something, not against something. Then he went on. And I'm like, that's all I got that day. I wrote that down. I was like, man, that's powerful. Be for something. Be for people, not against people. Okay? And that's just how I want to live. I tell you, days in the future, 30, 40 years from when I'm gone, I want people to look back at my life and not say, wow, he really knew how to put people in their place. He really knew he could criticize with the best. You ever read his blog, man? He told people where to go and what to do and how to do it. No. I want him to look back and say, hey, he encouraged people. You know, he rooted people on in their path. He was there cheerleading for them as they were running their race. You know, and Paul says, wow, I don't feel like I got a lot of cheerleaders out there. I feel like people are talking bad about me everywhere I go. People are causing riots, you know, and stopping me from preaching the gospel. And Jesus says, Paul, now's the time to just draw on me. Draw on me. Draw on the power that's on the inside of you, and let me live big in you, even in the midst of persecution. There will be persecution in this life, folks. Don't look for it. You don't need to look for it. Okay? It has a way of finding you if you're just following God. But don't be blown away from it, and don't make people your enemy. I might be jumping ahead. Let me go to chapter 23 in Acts and just give you a couple thoughts again. Paul goes on. He speaks to a group of Pharisees and Sadducees. He, in his talking to them, he inserts a controversy to them that causes a big dispute and divides the crowd. Right when this is all happening, 40 people take an oath that they're not going to eat until Paul's dead. How long can you go without eating? 12:30. Anyway, they take an oath. They take a solemn oath. They said, and we're not going to eat until Paul's dead. We're going to kill this guy. All this is happening. And you know, I told the first service, I said, I got upset one time when somebody unfriended me on Facebook. But they took an oath. Weren't going to eat until he died. I want to say this, though, kind of connected with that thorn in the flesh stuff, you know, that we're not going to get caught up in. Our fight is never against people, okay? People are never the enemy. Well, you know, there's 40 people that took an oath they're not going to eat until I die. They're not the enemy, okay? They got caught up in some kind of darkness that we don't want to have any part of, but they're not the enemy. They're just going down the wrong trail. In Ephesians 6 and 12, it says this. It says, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. What does that mean? We don't pick a fight with people, okay? It says our fight is against principalities, powers, rulers of darkness of this age, spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. And I always like to read the J.B. Phillips translation. He says it like this. He says, our fight is not against any physical enemy, but against organizations and powers that are spiritual. We're up against the unseen power that controls this dark world and spiritual agents from the very headquarters of evil. I like the way he says it. You know, but my fight in this life, I tell you, it's not against people. So-and-so's talking bad about me. They're not my enemy. What are you supposed to do about them? We're just supposed to love them. That's what we're supposed to do. Just love them. And draw on the grace that's living and abiding in you. So then Paul goes on, and what happens? Acts 24, he pleads his case to Felix. Then, you know, did I read this part? You know, he got contained. He got imprisoned under this guy named Felix, who was the governor, and he was actually 2 years he was held captive. And Felix, you know, would come and talk to Paul and leave, and it was like he was kind of digging it, but he actually ran out his term as governor, and then there's a brand new governor named Festus. And so while Festus is new to this office of governor, he gets a visit from King Agrippa. King Agrippa comes to welcome Festus and to just, you know, into his new position and kind of make a good relationship there. And while he's there, he hears about Paul, who's left over from the last governor. What do I do with this guy, Paul? He's being held in jail, and I don't know what he's done wrong. What should we do? And Agrippa says, well, I'd kind of like to hear this guy myself. So, you know, it's arranged by chapter 26, you'll find this, that Paul finds himself before King Agrippa. And what Paul does is he walks out. I love the first words he says to King Agrippa. He says, King Agrippa, I think myself happy. That's what the King James says. I think myself happy. And you can interpret that a few different ways, but I like this, and just knowing Paul's character, he chose his thoughts. Even in a situation that could have been, you know, totally nerve-wracking and totally defeating, Paul says, I think myself happy. You know, in life, it's good to choose what we think. It's good to choose. Can I say this? It's good to choose happy thoughts. Yeah, happy meals, happy thoughts, all that stuff. Yeah. So anyway, he goes on, and then the next thing you know, he's telling King Agrippa the same story he's told over and over again. What is the story? It's the story of his encounter with Jesus. And so that brings me to the second thing I wanted to just highlight this morning in reading through the book of Acts is this, is we need to have a testimony to share. Okay? We've been calling them stories to share because, you know, really these testimonies, these stories are not limited to your salvation conversion experience. Although that's that's a great one. But you know, what's God doing in your life even now? You know, I found that when Paul would share his testimony even to King Agrippa, he did go back. He went back before Christ. And he shared some of the things that he did and what a bad person he was. But he quickly moved into the point where he encountered Jesus and how his life changed. And he went from that to telling him that he had a call. He had a mission that was given to him by Jesus to go turn people from darkness to light. And that just consumed his whole life. And he shared that with them. And he shared how he had made that his course, his steps in life was to follow the plan of God. And then when he was all done talking about it, he looked at the king and he says, "And king, I've not been disobedient to the heavenly vision." Wow. Wow. But I wanted to just come back to it and say this, that your story has power in it. Don't let the devil lie to you and try to deflate you into that your experience doesn't measure up with others, because you have a story to tell. You have a story to tell. You guys know all my stories. I tell them all the time. But I was talking to this good friend of mine a couple weeks ago, and I have this group of friends that we've been lifelong friends. You know, we haven't. Sometimes there's been years that have gone by we haven't talked, but especially now that we've hit a certain age, we've kind of made a point to get together, and we have lunch a couple times a year. And what do we have in common? We all grew up in North Minneapolis. We were North Siders, and we're proud of being North Siders. North Siders, yeah, that's who we are. That's how we roll. So, but you know, I talked to these guys, and one of them I was talking to a couple weeks ago, good friend, who lived a couple blocks away from me growing up. And he might be tuned in today. He watches a lot of times online. But I was telling him about love stories and how we've been asking people in the church to write down the things that God has been doing for them. You know, we've had, you know, people that have been healed in their body, and people that have gotten new jobs, people that have just had God show up in their lives. And he's listened to me share about it, and he says, you know, I got one of them stories. I got a few of those. I says, well, tell me about him. And he says, well, there's this one time back in the early 80s. He said that you know, he was involved in some things that you know, probably weren't the greatest right then, but just going to this part of it, it was a hot summer, okay? It was a hot summer. And it was so hot that the grass was going dormant, you know, in the end of summer and, you know, before fall and everything. And there was this one day that he went to work, and through a series of unfortunate events, his dog got left outside, okay? And my friend has had dogs, a dog, you know, since I can remember. And he loves his dogs like you'd love a kid. And I'm that way too. I mean, we had our Starbuck back in the day. He was like our you know, kid, you know. But so anyway, he comes home from work, and his dog is having like a seizure, okay? And so he takes his dog to the vet, and the vet says, well, your dog's got sunstroke. And he goes home, and his eyes are kind of glazed. Not my friend, but the dog. And tongue is hanging out, and you know, he's just not acting right. I mean, that is disheartening. You know, if you ever had an animal like that. I mean, so the other part is that in this time in my friend's life, he was doing a lot of a certain controlled substance that would alter your behavior, okay? He was snorting a lot of coke. How's that? Okay? He was just snorting a lot of coke. And he was getting this deal on some coke, and he had some friends over, and they sat up all night snorting, you know. And I don't know, you guys probably never did any kind of thing like that, you know. But anyway, you know, I get it. And so you don't sleep when you're doing that, you know. It keeps you awake. But then towards the, you know, the end of it all, you know, you kind of get to a point where you're kind of ready to crash. But they're kind of getting to that point, you know. And he flipped on TV, turned the TV set on. And who's on there but some preacher? You know, my friend is telling it to me. He says, you know, that guy Copeland? I said, yeah, Kenneth Copeland. He goes, yeah, Kenneth Copeland was on the TV when he turned it on. And my friend's saying, you know, he's so intense. And I was like, yeah, he is. He is intense. And he says it was right getting to the point in his program where he was going to pray for people. And so he encouraged them to you know, have God prove himself to them. So here's the love story. My friend says, you know, I do this with God every now and then. He said, so I just said to God, I said, hey, prove yourself to me. And he says, I put a hand on my TV, I put a hand on my dog. And he said, when that Copeland guy prayed, he said it was like an electric force just came right out of the TV set, and it knocked me and the dog over. And he said, and the friends of mine that were sitting there watching, they said it looked like a blue light came out of the TV set. And after that, they all crashed. And when my friend woke up, he got up from all that, and he said he looked out, and there was his dog. His dog was whole as could be, totally healed. And he says, yeah. And my friend is talking to me. He goes, yeah, God's real. God's real. You know what? God will show himself to you. And he shows himself to you. That's a story. And you share that story with people, it has impact on people. When Paul was sharing this to King Agrippa, I love this. There's little things that were said. Is one thing that Agrippa looked at him and he says, you almost persuade me to be a Christian. Right in the middle of the court proceedings, the king himself is listening to Paul. And Paul tells him his story, and he says, you almost persuade me to be a Christian. Your stories are full of power. You know that? In Revelation, it says this in Revelation 12:11. It says this, they overcame him. Who did they overcome? They overcame the accuser, the devil. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And they loved not their lives even to the death. But I've read that before, and I thought, you know, God had to deal with me. Because sometimes I'd almost get embarrassed about sharing my testimony. Because it was like sometimes people think their testimony is, well, I've been good since I've been 2. Never did anything wrong. Let me tell you, you've been good since you've been 2. You still need Jesus because you have fallen from grace. You need to wake up and get saved, buddy. You need Jesus. There ain't nothing, you know, that we've done that's great. It's all what he did. That's what makes it great, okay? You know, some people struggle, again, if you're going to have a testimony, I'll give you a couple pointers, though. Okay? You ready? Be able to share it in a concise way. Okay? Be able to share it in a concise way. Paul shared his whole life in a matter of just a few verses. And don't leave out the bad stuff, but don't make them the main point. Make sure that the testimony you share ultimately magnifies God. Okay? It would be good to just think about it for a while and think about, you think, well, I don't know if I have. Well, think about when you got born again, because this is what Paul shared. Paul got a lot of mileage on that. And even in his last days, he shares it with the king of no less, and it almost persuades the king to get saved. I would reckon this, that as the king walked away, I bet that story came back to him a few more times. You know, I bet, don't ever judge things by how they look on the outside. You know, Paul shared one time and the place erupted in a big riot and he ends up in jail, and you could go, oh my, woe is me. I guess I'm never sharing that again. Half the people that rioted probably walked home and their grandma had been praying for them, and they go, oh, well, maybe there was something to that. Boy, I acted poorly. You know, you don't know what God does after you leave. that's the cool thing is man, you're not just in this thing alone. You know, I remember seeing that one time when I was going to go share with a friend. You know, I was going to share the gospel with him after I first got saved. And I remember just thinking about it before I went, is that God is with me. And that the whole time I'm sharing with him, God's going to be talking to his heart. And I remember I even told him when I was telling him, I couldn't keep it back. I said, you know, right now, he's even dealing with your heart even while I'm talking. And he looked at me and he goes, yeah, he is. And the guy got saved and he died like within a month. You know, had a heart attack. You know, it was related to some of the drugs that I probably introduced him to, I'm sorry to say. But you know, God got him born again. To the end of that story that I could tell you too is that man, probably 30 years later on Facebook, I ran across his brother. I recognized the name and I messaged him. I said, "Are you so-and-so's brother?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I could tell by, you creep. If you're a master creeper on Facebook, you can tell about a person before you ever talk to him. And I could tell this guy was a Christian. So I said, well, you know, I actually prayed with your brother to get saved before he died. And you know what? He didn't even know that. 30 years he thought his brother wasn't saved when he died. And he was all excited. He was going to go tell his mom. I said, wow, happy day. That's good. All right, where in the world were we, Pastor Stephen? So anyway, you have a testimony. You have a story. There's power to share. Let me read 1 Peter 3:15 to you. This is 15-ish. It's out of the Message Bible. It says, through thick and thin, keep your hearts at attention, in adoration before Christ your Master. Be ready to speak up and tell anyone who asks you why you're living the way you are, and always with the utmost courtesy. Keep a clear conscience before God, so that when people throw mud at you, none of it will stick. They'll end up realizing they're the ones who need a bath. I like it. All right, so Philippians 4:11. I'll just close with this morning. Again, you know, these are just things that popped into my little noggin as I'm reading through the book of Acts and reading Paul's life. And somehow they just made even more sense than they've ever made. Because the very guy that we saw that had gone through all this continual cycle, you know, of preaching and getting stoned and getting beaten and thrown in jail, he says this. He says, not that I speak in regard to need, for I've learned in whatever state I am to be content. That means so much more to me now. I've learned in whatever state I'm in to be content. I know how to be abased. I know how to abound everywhere and in all things. I've learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Probably even one of my favorite translations is the 20th century of that verse 11. And it goes something like this. It says, I've learned that in every... How'd it go again? Do you remember from first service? Okay, come on. I've learned in everything, he says, this is the part, to be independent of circumstances. I've learned to be independent of circumstances. Independent of circumstances. That means that I'm not affected by what's going on out there. I'm affected by what's going on in here. I'm really convinced that the Apostle Paul had learned how to be content, and that he could be more content in a prison than some people can be in their front room in their lazy boy. It's not about what's out here. It's about what you can tap into in here. Paul said, I've learned in every situation to be independent of the circumstances. I'm marching to my own beat here. God's the one I'm marching to. His beat, His drummer. I tell you what, Holy Spirit is leading me through life. He's given me the juice to take on any day, any crowd, anything that comes my way, because the greater one's in me. He strengthens me.
Hey church family, Gary here. We want to talk about some of the ways that you can give. One of the ways you can give is with text messaging. So send a text message to 77977 saying, love giving, and then wait a second for the response. Click the link, set the amount you want to give, whether it's a reoccurring gift, and then hit give. Another way to give is on the website. go to www.wearelovechurch.com. Up at the top, you're going to see a word saying Give. Click that. You'll see a button that says Click here to give. So go ahead and click it. And then it's going to take you to a page asking you the amount, whether it's a one-time gift or reoccurring gift. Go ahead and hit Next and then confirm. Another way you can give is with the Love Church app. You can download it from the iOS store or the Google Play Store. Once it's installed, just open it up. You'll see a button that says Give. Tap that, select the amount, whether it's a one-time gift or a reoccurring, and then hit Give.